Hello, 7th grade. This is Miss Racer here. Your assignment for today is Lesson 4, and you will be reading chapters 7 through 10. 7, 8, 9, and 10. And in a minute, I will read chapters 7, 8 to you. And you'll need to read 9 and 10 on your own. But before I do that, I want to go over a couple things from this lesson. First of all, you are talking about rationing. You have a paragraph to read about rationing, so make sure you read over that. And you're also learning about characterization. Characterization is how the author portrays the character in the story, or tells us about the character in the story. So there's three ways to do characterization. You can either use dialogue in a conversation to show what kind of person they are. You can use actions, the things that they do. Tell a lot about what kind of person they are. And the third thing is a description. You can simply describe what kind of person they are. So dialogue, actions, and description are three ways that you can show what someone is like or characterize someone. So you should be keeping track of that, knowing those things. And for your journal entry today, I'm going to have you choose one of those and characterize someone you know. So either show what they're like through dialogue or their actions or a description of them, and characterize them using one of those methods. Okay, so it should be someone that you know well. It doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be in cursive, just a couple sentences characterizing someone using one of those three methods. Okay, and I will read chapters 7 and 8 to you now, and then you will need to read 9 and 10 on your own. Okay, chapter 7. Just one more village, only a few more miles, and they would be there. It was a pretty little town, old brick houses hunched together, leaning on each other for support. Ancient grandfather trees stretching out decrepit arms, blessing the unassuming dwellings. Occasional ill-fed horses ambling along the cobblestone street, bumping wagons along behind them with complete unconcern for the riders perched high on their piles of junk or twigs. It was a town that wore an evening sunset well. Maria, her head throbbing, her bundle weighing her down, trudged through town, taking little notice of the beauty of the lingering sunset. Her two little ones, marching bravely on either side of her, said nothing, too fatigued and heartsick to talk. Hansi remarked that his feet were so tired he didn't know where the road ended and his feet began. Maria looked with compassion on the two remaining members of her family and promised that when they got to the tall church in the center of town, now only a block away, they would see if it was open. Maybe they could rest on the benches for a few minutes and eat the last fragments of their rations. There would be a treat. The nurse at the hospital last night had slipped them a little cheese from her own allotment. Almost they had reached the door of the towering church. All three of their souls reaching out for its protecting walls, their mouths watering for the beautiful yellow cheese, when the sudden off-key clangs from the belfry beat down like rain upon the village. "What's wrong, Mamma?" "I'm sorry, son. The suddenness and nearness of the bells startled me. Let's go in." She turned to the right, noting that the door was open, and entered, sitting quickly on the first bench available. The children dropped beside her. Maria said nothing, but leaned the weight of her body on her arms, resting on the back of the bench in front of her while she listened to the lovely resonant tones of the bells. Suddenly, she raised her head to listen, realizing that the bells were ringing out a tune she loved. Am Festberg ist unser Gott, or A Mighty Fortress is Our God. And I probably butchered that German, but I don't know German, so you have to bear with me. She repeated softly, then whispered the rest of it to herself. How much those words meant to her! With trembling hands she broke the last small loaf of black bread into three pieces, two large ones and one small, and likewise broke the cheese. Not that she cared if she ever ate again. But the children must, and she must too, to keep up her strength for what only the Lord knew lay ahead of her. Emfechtberg. Yes, God was her fortress and her strength. Even now, but almost she had let him slip. Almost she had gotten like Justina, bitter and skeptical. She would never tell anyone, not even Hans, how frightful that moment had been last night when they had arrived in Cornrade and had been told that Lenny had passed away and that Hans had returned home that very evening. If the sister had not been so gentle, so completely understanding, if she had not taken the children, fed them hot soup, and given them a bed, breaking the news to them, Maria did not know whether she could have made it. It was a case of advanced tuberculosis, rarely found in children so young, the tall, grave nurse had told her, and your husband stayed at her bedside until she died. By the time he got her here, her fever was treacherously high. The second day it was lower, but this afternoon it went up again, and the child passed quietly away. She cleared her throat awkwardly. May God give you strength. It was strange, ironic, how those rasping words had come back to her at the time, shot at her from a dozen cynical lips. Where is your God? She had been so sure, so very sure that Hans would be at the end of their day's journey, waiting to comfort her, to tell her that Lenny was going to get well. She believed in the arms of God. She knew they were there, but they were not warm and material like Hans' arms around her. She was ashamed now of the way her faith had collapsed at the time she needed it most. Perhaps it was because she was so indescribably tired. She was not her real self. This is surely wonderful cheese, Mamma, Hansi said suddenly, his voice echoing in the empty church, his little boyness once more surfacing with its cheer. Why aren't you eating, Mamma? I was just thinking, praying a little, I guess. She smiled down at him, a ghost of a smile really, but he took it as a live one. During the past day, Rosie and Hansi had little strength to go on since their mother's courage, which they had relied on, was now crushed and broken. Church is where people usually pray, isn't it? This from Rosie, obviously to be making talk, to break this dead-weight silence. Maria did not answer. The words she could have said lay heavy on her heart. Hansi sat and studied for a long time, his bread and cheese gone, the church too dark to observe any such interesting things as a pulpit or the mice running to and fro under the benches. I don't think it's really much use to pray anywhere, he said philosophically, watching his mother out of the corner of his eye to see her reaction to this brazen statement. Maria was still bent over, the last bite in her hand, yet untouched, and it was several minutes before she realized what Hansi had said. What? What did you say, Hansi? I said I don't believe in praying anywhere anymore. That's what I said. Hansi! Well, we prayed that we would find Papa and that Lenny would get better. We didn't find Papa, and Lenny... It sounded awful to finish it. He couldn't bear it. Dear ones, we are going to go right on praying the rest of our lives. God hears our prayers and He is answering them, some way or other, but not always in the way we understand. As for Lenny, she is happier than she has ever been. She is not hungry. She isn't sick. You told us once the streets are made of gold, didn't you, Mamma? Hans asked soberly, and Maria, looking into his inquisitive, dirt-streaked face, knew that he was no very staunch unbeliever. Yes, son, it's more beautiful than I can tell you, and someday we'll be there together, enjoying it. Oh, come on, children, we must go, or it'll be dark before we get home. Home. How could they go back to that building again? Would Hans still be close at hand? What would he think when he had found her gone? And poor Tante Annie. Frau Schmidt perhaps would let them sleep in a corner of her room. But if they found Hans right away, he would know what to do. The thought of being with him once more, of leaning on a stronger person for support and judgment, the very hope of it gave Maria new vitality. Do you feel rested, Rosie? Yes, but I'm awful glad we're almost there. So am I. If only there had been a train today, we wouldn't have had to walk back. Maria's heart failed her every time she thought of last night. How, when she had finally come to her senses and recovered from the shock of little Lenny, she had hurried down to the railroad station to inquire about trains. The dear sister had offered them train fare, but Maria had arrived only to see the last train pull out and to hear the news that there would be none the following day because of the fuel shortage. Maria helped Rosie fix her strap, brush her hair back from her face, and checked Hansi's bag to be sure everything was in order. Almost ready to leave the large building, all three of them started, realizing that there was someone else in the room, entering from behind the pulpit. Rosie was frightened, and for a moment a weird little tune trembled on the strings of Maria's own taut nerves. Then she remembered. "It's only the man who is playing the bells, children," she assured them. "Remember Emfest Berg?" The musician appeared, a pin-like body, slightly stooped, topped with a steel-gray head. Still intoxicated with the charm of his own music, he closed the door behind him with care, walking slowly, thick brows knit in concentration, hands in pockets. Maria thought, as she watched him, that a man with a face like that would have to be either very good or a very bad man, for his features were strong and definite, only a thin covering for the intense emotions within. And the way he had played! "Please don't let us startle you, sir. We took a moment to rest when we saw the church doors open." They stood in the little vestibule, ready once more to be on their way, yet eager for a look at the maker of the music that had refreshed them. The old man surveyed his audience, taking in the usual ragged appearance and heavy loads of the refugees. Then his gaze rested on Maria's troubled face. "We like your music very much, especially the message in the song you played. If it strengthened you for your journey, I'm richly repaid. Are you going far?" He paused a moment to take out the heavy keys from his pocket and close the mammoth door. The group of four turned together and walked northward, Maria explaining where they were going, somehow trusting this new acquaintance and inquiring just how many kilometers they had ahead of her. She had long observed that men seemed always to know how far it was from one given place to another. "Well now, here's where I turn off. Let's see, I think you have about 10 kilometers to the city. I trust you have a place to stay overnight? You look tired." "Thank you for your kindness. We think—" Maria paused, remembering that around children one must be sure. "We're certain we have a place to stay. If we can only find my husband, we have nothing to worry about." "And if you don't find him tonight yet?" "We have a friend." "Then may God bless you." And the old man shook hands with them in the same solemn manner that he had met them. Turning up a narrow winding street, he disappeared over the hill, unaware that he was another living proof to Maria and the children that there was still goodness in the world. "He was nice, wasn't he?" Rosie observed. "He reminded me a lot of old grandfather." "Grandfather couldn't play the church bells," Hansi argued, "and anyhow, he was even nicer than this man." "Do you really remember grandfather, children?" Maria asked in surprise. "You were very small when he passed on." "I can just remember a little, how he had a beard, and how he would tell us stories. The rest, I guess, you told us," Hansi explained, for grandfather had been so often spoken of that he was all but canonized in their minds. "I remember how he died along the way, and how everyone was so sad at all the rest of the track. The evening shadows were deepening, and evening and death seemed so closely akin that Maria unconsciously hastened her footsteps and changed the subject, afraid that the children would once more talk of their beloved Lenny. If they did not speak of her, Maria could go on, but sometimes today when they had discussed her passing, she had almost collapsed. Looking down at her charges, she saw Rosie nudge Hansi and whisper something to him. "Don't talk about people dying. You'll make Mother cry." Her childish whisper came out loud and clear. Maria bit her lip and went on. Even losing 5 minutes might mean just missing Big Hans. If they found him, she could endure anything. If they didn't, it was amazing how welcome a dreary pile of rubble, a street corner, a singular light, and a broken sidewalk could be just because they were familiar. When Maria and the children finally hurried through the town, they thought they had never seen a city so beautiful as Crowder. Just outside the city, they all sat down for a moment, Maria warning the children that there would be no more rest until they reached Frau Schmidt's. She did not tell them how dangerous she felt it was to be walking side streets at night, how wary she was of leering soldiers, of strapping officers looming from behind a bush in the park or a doorway on the street. But she was afraid they could sense her insecurity. Close to the train station in the center of town, the streets were more heavily populated. Maria and the children wove in and out of the crowds. At times, it was almost impossible to keep Rosie from being run down by a cart of potatoes someone had brought in from the country and dragged off and on the train. The closer to the station they came, the more activity and bustling could be seen, for everyone was anxious to get home, though home might be a hovel of despair. Maria caught Hansi looking piteously at a lad of his own age, standing off in the shadows, grabbing up cigarette stubs in his grimy fists as they were dropped by pedestrians. Everywhere, faces were grave, bent on self-preservation. Maria hated cities. She quickened her step and determined that when they got their family together, they would head west once more, this time finding refuge in the country. Left from the station, quickly past the shadows, the endless blocks of Friedrichstrasse, then 6 more unlighted blocks. Maria paused before the front steps, unable to walk another step until she had got her breath, her heart pounding blood into her face, her forehead, her ears. It was several moments before she noticed that Rosie was behaving strangely, suddenly throwing herself wildly against her and sobbing into her coat. "Rosie, what's wrong? We're finally here. Why are you crying, Rosie?" Maria put her arms around the child and drew her to herself. "I'm afraid, Mama. They were in there. Her voice broke out in a loud hiccupy sob. "They took our Tante Annie. Papa isn't in there. I know he isn't." "But our dear Frau Schmidt is there, and we can stay with her. They aren't in there. Not any more. I think, Rosie dear," she whispered, "that Frau Schmidt might have good news for us." With that, the 3 hurried up the steps, Maria pushing Rosie along with new strength, Hansi running on ahead, taking the steps 2 by 2. Had Frau Schmidt opened her door upon the pale faces of 3 ghosts, she could not have been more shocked than when she discovered the 3 tired, near-weeping figures framed in her doorway. Alright, I'm going to stop there, and I will read Chapter 8 to you in another video.